Maybe they're your soulmate. Or even a better version of you. That's what my friend Joe said when I told him about my downstairs neighbor for the first time. My neighbor who seemingly liked all the exact same things I did, but who I'd never met. Excuse me? Better? I laughed. He didn't elaborate, only grinned as a response, and then suggested we knock on their door. I met Joe through some other friends a year ago. After we realized that we lived on the same street, we started hanging out more often. I had moved to town a couple of years ago, right after college, for a marketing job I was lucky to get. Both of our jobs were mostly remote now, so we'd meet for coffee breaks or even work together at my place some days. This made him a witness to all the madness I would be going through, which I was truly grateful for because I'm quite sure that any outside person would have thought I was going insane. Hell, even for a while, even I thought I was going insane. It all started with music. I lived on the 5th floor of an apartment building. The way the building was designed, there were 2 apartments on each floor, and from the outside, each floor looked pretty much the same, except for shoes in front of the door or individual welcome mats and stuff like that. We didn't have an elevator, so I'd cross all the apartments on my way up and down. I started noticing the apartment right underneath mine when the tenant happened to listen to the same song I had been listening to before I made my way outside. I even ran back upstairs to my apartment because I thought I left my speaker on, but I hadn't. It was coming from the place downstairs. Funny coincidence, nothing more. The following day, though, it happened again. This time it was not a particularly well-known artist, but, Shazam exists. Maybe my neighbor and I had similar tastes. However, when this kept happening for days, I started thinking that maybe it was a passive-aggressive way to tell me my music was too loud. So I started using headphones and there was no more music coming from the neighbor. But that doesn't mean it ended there. It simply switched to movies or series. I would walk by that apartment and hear the same things that I'd been watching earlier that day. Even the exact same episodes of shows. And even though I had really lowered the volume, how can you even hear that? About a week after it all started, Joe and I were working at my place. That's when I told him about the music and the shows. He suggested we knock on the door to see who this person was. I didn't see neighbors often in the hallway in general, but this particular one was a real mystery. The apartment under mine had nothing in front of it, pretty much like mine. I had a hallway inside my apartment where I left shoes and other things. They didn't open the door, even though we could clearly hear movement inside. "Hello?" Joe called out, but there was no response. That's when the door of the apartment next to it opened where an elderly lady lived. I never interacted much with the neighbors, but I'd seen her once or twice before. "Excuse me," I said in a soft voice. "Do you know who lives here?" I pointed to the other door. She looked at me for a while, and then shrugged. "I believe it's a young woman, moved in very recently. Why?" "Oh, I think my package was accidentally delivered to her," I lied. "Maybe try again later. She doesn't seem to leave her home very often." "Poor thing." The lady smiled and started walking down the stairs. We didn't try again later. This girl seemed to be an introvert, and I didn't want to bug her. So she liked the same stuff as me or copied me. It's kind of funny. Like she was following my recommendations. However, every day it seemed to grow slightly stranger. It went from media to food. I started smelling the same things I was cooking coming from her apartment. I know that scents can travel, but it was so strong, right in front of her door. There was no way it was coming from my place. That was still fine, even though I have no idea when or how she got the groceries. I was home most days too, and I started peeking out of my apartment every time I heard a door close shut. Our building was pretty poorly soundproofed, but it was only the old lady who might have started thinking that I was stalking her. The coincidences stopped being funny when one day I walked by and smelled my perfume. It was one that my mother had gifted me. She got it from a place where you can mix together your own choice of scents. Not only was it really unique, but I also hadn't used it in months. There was no way she could have just copied it. I told some other friends about it as well, and everyone agreed that it was creepy. This woman didn't just have the same taste as me. She was stalking me. I decided that I didn't want to hang around at home all day anymore, right above her where she could probably listen to everything I did. I realized that if she heard my shows on such low volume, she probably also heard phone calls I made or conversations I had with friends who came over. So I started going back to the office more often, just to get away during the day. I was sick of feeling observed. For a few days, that was fine. I hardly noticed anything from the mystery neighbor anymore. That is, until I came home from work one day, and my key wouldn't fit inside my door. I called the landlord. Luckily, he didn't live far away and came over shortly after. His face was all puffy and red from walking up the stairs, and he clearly wasn't happy that he had to come. "So, what seems to be the problem?" he grunted, slightly out of breath. Even the old lady mastered the stairs better than him. "Like I said, my key doesn't fit the lock," I said and demonstrated it. He quickly grabbed the key from my hand. "Let me see. Keys don't just stop working. You must have broken off a piece or something." "Yeah, okay, well, is there a way to fix this?" He sighed and inspected the key further. Then he looked at me and started squinting his eyes. "Wait a second. Are you sure you're on the right floor?" I laughed. "Yes, I'm pretty sure I know where I live." He rolled his eyes and started walking off with my key in hand down the stairs. I followed him but stopped on the last step when I saw that he had just opened the door to the apartment one floor below mine. That's impossible," I whispered. "Look, love, I know all these floors look similar, but you should be able to count, yes?" I didn't respond, still frozen on that step. "Next time, check where you are before you call. Got it?" He shook his head and started walking away, leaving my key inside the open door. He was already a floor down when I heard him whisper, "I fucking hate new tenants." I was sure I had walked to the right floor, but I was tired. Maybe I kept walking without thinking. Embarrassed, I finally started moving and went inside the apartment. However, when I turned on the lights, I knew that I hadn't made a mistake. This was not my home. But somebody tried to make it look like it was. When you step inside my real apartment, you get through a small hallway. All I have in it are a chair and a little closet for shoes and coats. This place had that too, but the closet and chair were made out of cardboard. It felt like I was going through an out-of-body experience. I couldn't stop myself. I stepped further inside into what would be the bedroom. Just like in the hallway, everything in there were copies of my own furniture, made out of cardboard. In my real apartment, I used to have a bunch of pictures on the walls of friends and family members. Here, I saw exact copies drawn by hand, all leaving out the faces of the people. My stomach started turning. I stumbled back to the hallway, out through the door, and towards the stairs. That's when I suddenly heard something from the upper floor. My floor. It sounded like a jingle, something I hadn't heard before. My heart was racing. I looked up out of reflex just for a second, and that's when I caught a glimpse of her. She had her arms over the railing, but her face was hidden. Then, only for a moment, she looked up and hid again. It was uncanny. This woman had my hair and was dressed in my clothes. Even her face resembled mine, it was only slightly off. As if she tried to copy it, but didn't get it quite right. I opened my mouth but couldn't speak. A surge of anger filled me. I wanted to jump up there, grab her by the hair, and push her down the stairs. I can't even explain where that came from. I usually wasn't exactly hostile. But something was stopping my body from moving. I kept standing there until she looked up again. Our eyes met, and the anger turned into fear. It's difficult to describe the feeling I had when she looked at me. Everything inside of me just turned dark and I became nauseous and dizzy. She opened her mouth, but just like mine, no words came out. Finally, she moved from the railing, and seconds later I heard her door shut. My door. I should have called the police or my landlord, but I didn't. When my body would finally move again, I ran down all the stairs through the door and didn't stop until I was in front of Joe's house. We were sitting on his sofa. My body was still shaking. The cup of tea Joe had made me had already turned cold. I told him what I saw. I told him everything. She's going insane. I need to call for help. That's what he must be thinking, I thought. But he didn't say anything like that. Instead, he patiently listened. When I was done, we both stayed silent for a while. Finally, Joe asked a question. You're not going to tell anyone, right, Maxine? I wrapped my arms around my legs. This place was freezing. I don't know how, I whispered. Because they wouldn't believe you? You believe me, right? I carefully asked. Joe smiled. He did believe me. I could feel that. But that wasn't all. He was eerily calm, as if none of the things I just told him were odd at all. We could call the police, he offered, but it didn't feel sincere. Then he smiled again. But we're not. Because you saw her. And you felt it. You felt that she wasn't right. That she wasn't quite done yet. But pretty close to human. Yeah? I looked at the guy who had been one of my best friends this past year. The person I'd run to after I didn't know where else to go. I swallowed. Don't worry, Joe continued. Some need time to adjust. It took me a little bit, but now I feel absolutely, perfectly real. My breathing became slower, and his eyes were fixated on mine. A strange sound pulled me away from this trance I'd fallen into, the same sound I had heard coming from my doppelganger. This time it was coming from Joe's phone. He got up to pick it up, and I used that moment to jump up and run towards the door. He grabbed my arm just before I could and said one more thing. She is the better version of you. Then he let me go. He didn't follow. I didn't tell anyone about what happened. Joe didn't say it that specifically, but I knew what he had meant. Telling anyone wouldn't do any good. It might only harm more people. I moved back with my parents. In the beginning, they asked a lot of questions, but they've given up now. All they know is that something traumatic must have happened to me. Slowly, I am coming back to my senses. I know that I didn't imagine any of that, but there are still so many questions that I can't answer. Like, why would they want my life, and what are they going to do with it? I also keep wondering if there is a real Joe still walking around somewhere, or if he got rid of him. The other thing is, I keep hearing that jingle. The other day, I swore I heard it in the supermarket. Later, a kid played it from their phone, and then I heard it on the television. This isn't just about me, and I can't stop wondering who else around me has been replaced.